The hangar stretched out like a cathedral of steel and ambition, its towering ceiling swallowing the hum of fluorescent lights. Emily Harper stood alone in the center, her work boots echoing faintly on the polished concrete floor. Before her loomed the beast, a rocket engine so massive it seemed to defy gravity itself, a labyrinth of titanium pipes, gleaming valves, and intricate wiring that pulsed with the promise of the stars. It was a marvel of engineering, a machine built to hurl humanity toward Mars. But it was broken. And nobody believed she could fix it. What would you do if the world's most powerful man bet against you? Emily's phone buzzed in the pocket of her worn SpaceX jacket, snapping her out of her thoughts. She fished it out, her heart lurching as she saw the sender's name, Elon Musk. The subject line was blunt, almost brutal, "The beast, 30 days or you're out." Her hands trembled as she opened the email, the words searing into her mind. Emily Harper, it read, "You've got one shot. Fix the beast in 30 days, or you're done at SpaceX. Prove them wrong. EM. Her breath caught in her throat. 30 days to fix an engine that had stumped the best aerospace engineers in the world. She was a junior engineer, barely 2 years out of MIT, her desk tucked in the corner of SpaceX's open-plan office in Hawthorne, California. She wasn't supposed to be here, standing in the shadow of a machine that could redefine humanity's future. Yet here she was, challenged by the man who'd built an empire on impossible dreams. She glanced around the cavernous hangar, the silence pressing against her ears. Her team, led by Greg Larson, a senior engineer with a permanent smirk, had laughed when she'd been assigned to the beast. "Stick to coffee runs, Harper," Greg had sneered at the last team meeting, his voice dripping with condescension as his buddies chuckled. "This is a man's game." Emily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms until they left crescent-shaped marks. She'd heard that tone her whole life. In her small Pennsylvania hometown, the boys in her high school physics class had mocked her for acing every test. At MIT, professors had raised skeptical eyebrows when she walked into advanced engineering seminars. Even her own father, Tom, a mechanic who'd taught her to wrench apart tractor engines, had once said, "Engineering's a tough road, Em. Maybe pick something safer." But Elon Musk had seen something in her. Or was this just a cruel test, a way to weed her out? She closed her eyes, and a memory flickered like an old film reel, her father's grease-stained hands guiding hers as she tightened a bolt on a tractor engine in their dusty barn. The air had smelled of oil and hay, the summer heat pressing against her skin. "Machines don't care who you are, Em," he'd said, his voice gruff but warm. "They just need you to understand them." She'd been 10 years old, her ponytail streaked with dirt, her heart swelling with pride. That was the moment she'd known she wanted to build things, fix things, make things that mattered. But the beast was no tractor. It was a beast in every sense, 16 feet tall, a tangle of cutting-edge technology designed to power SpaceX's next-generation rocket. Its fuel injection system was failing, causing catastrophic misfires that had grounded a critical test flight for the Mars program. The best minds at SpaceX had tried and failed to solve it. Some whispered it was unfixable, a design flaw too deep to unravel. And now, Emily had 30 days to do what they couldn't, or lose everything she'd fought for. Her phone buzzed again, jarring her back to the present. A text from Jake Martinez, the only person on her team who didn't treat her like an outsider. "You got this, Em. Don't let the suits get in your head." Jake was a junior mechanic, a lanky guy with a quick smile and a knack for fixing things nobody else could. He'd been her lifeline at SpaceX, the one who'd slip her a coffee during late-night shifts and crack jokes to ease the tension. She smiled faintly, but the weight of Musk's email pressed harder. She stepped closer to the beast, her fingers brushing its cool, metallic surface. It seemed to hum with a life of its own, daring her to unravel its secrets. The engine's core was a maze of fuel lines and injectors, each component precision-engineered to withstand the inferno of rocket propulsion. Somewhere in that maze was a flaw. A glitch that could ground SpaceX's dreams and her career along with it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily's heart pounded as she reread Musk's email. Prove them wrong. Those 3 words burned in her chest. She'd spent her life proving people wrong, her high school bullies, her skeptical professors, even her father, who'd never quite believed she could make it in a field like this. But this was different. This was Elon Musk, the man who'd sent cars into space and built rockets that landed themselves. If he thought she could do this, maybe, just maybe, she could. She opened her email app and typed a reply, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. I'm in. I'll fix the beast. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, the soft whoosh of the email echoing in her ears like a gunshot. The hangar's silence felt heavier now, but it wasn't oppressive, it was a challenge. She wasn't just fighting for her job. She was fighting for every moment she'd been told she wasn't enough, every time she'd been pushed aside or overlooked. As she turned to leave, the California sun streamed through the hangar's open doors, blinding her for a moment. She didn't see Greg Larson watching from the shadows, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowing. He'd been at SpaceX for a decade, climbing the ranks with charm and ruthlessness. He'd been gunning for a promotion to lead engineer on the Mars program, and the beast was his ticket. He wasn't about to let a nobody like Emily Harper steal his spotlight. Emily stepped outside, the warm May air brushing against her face. The SpaceX campus buzzed with activity, engineers in headsets, forklifts hauling equipment, the distant roar of a test engine firing. She pulled her jacket tighter, her mind racing. 30 days. She had 30 days to solve an impossible problem, to silence Greg's taunts, to prove to Musk, and herself, that she belonged here. She thought of her father again, his words echoing, "Machines don't care who you are." But people did. Greg cared. Her team cared. And Musk cared enough to give her this chance, even if it felt like a trap. She glanced back at the beast, its silhouette looming through the hangar doors. It was a monster, but it was her monster now. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Jake, "Meet me at the lab tonight. Got a hunch about those fuel injectors." Emily's lips curved into a determined smile. She wasn't alone, not entirely. Jake believed in her, and maybe that was enough to start. As she walked across the campus, her boots crunching on the gravel path, she felt a spark of something new, something reckless and alive. The beast was a puzzle, and she'd always been good at puzzles. She'd spent her childhood taking apart radios and rebuilding lawnmower engines, her father watching with a mix of pride and worry. She'd aced fluid dynamics at MIT, even when her classmates whispered she didn't belong. She'd clawed her way into SpaceX, despite the odds. And now, she had 30 days to do what no one else could. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the campus. Emily's heart beat faster, not with fear but with purpose. She didn't know if she could fix the beast. She didn't know if Musk's challenge was a vote of confidence or a setup for failure. But she knew one thing, she wasn't going to quit. Greg Larson stepped out of the hangar behind her, his phone already in hand, texting one of his allies on the team. "Harper's got the email. She's in over her head. Time to make sure she crashes." He smirked, slipping the phone back into his pocket. The game was on, and he played to win. Emily didn't see him. She didn't need to. She had the beast, a deadline, and a chance to prove them all wrong. The clock was ticking. The Pennsylvania air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, the kind of summer evening that clung to your skin and made the world feel alive. Emily Harper, barely 10 years old, knelt in the dirt of her father's barn, her small hands smudged with grease as she wrestled with a rusted bolt on an old John Deere tractor. Her ponytail swung as she leaned into the wrench, her tongue poking out in concentration. The barn's wooden walls creaked under the weight of the evening breeze, and the faint hum of cicadas drifted through the open door. "Easy, Em," her father, Tom Harper, said, his voice rough but patient. He crouched beside her, his flannel shirt stained with oil, his calloused hands steady as he guided her grip. Feel the give, not the fight. Machines talk if you listen. Emily nodded, her hazel eyes narrowing as she gave the wrench one last tug. The bolt loosened with a satisfying clunk, and she grinned, her face lighting up like the fireflies flickering outside. Got it, Dad, she said, holding up the wrench like a trophy. Tom chuckled, ruffling her hair. That's my girl. Keep at it, and you'll fix anything. That moment, under the barn's flickering bulb, was when Emily fell in love with machines. Not just their gears and bolts, but the way they held secrets, waiting for someone patient enough to unravel them. She didn't know then that she'd carry that love all the way to SpaceX, or that it would lead her to a rocket engine called the Beast. But she knew, even at 10, that she wanted to build things that mattered, things that could change the world. Now, standing in her cramped SpaceX cubicle in Hawthorne, California, Emily felt a pang of that old memory. The email from Elon Musk still burned in her mind, fix the Beast in 30 days, or you're done. She sank into her chair, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and stared at the schematics on her computer screen. The Beast's fuel injection system was a nightmare of complexity, a puzzle that had stumped engineers far more experienced than her. But as she traced the digital lines of its design, she couldn't help but think of that barn, of her father's voice, of the girl who'd believed she could fix anything. Her cubicle was a small rebellion against the sterile SpaceX office, a photo of her and her dad pinned to the wall, a dog-eared copy of Introduction to Fluid Dynamics on her desk, a half-dead cactus she'd named Spike. It was a far cry from the sprawling fields of her childhood in Edenville, Pennsylvania, a town so small it barely registered on a map. Edenville was the kind of place where everyone knew your business, where the diner served the same greasy burgers every day, and where dreams of rocket science felt as distant as the stars. Emily's childhood hadn't been easy. Her mother, Linda, had left when Emily was 6, walking out one rainy night with a suitcase and a note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't stay." Emily could still picture her father's face when he read that note, his jaw tight, his eyes hollow. He'd never talked about it, and neither had she. Instead, they'd buried themselves in the barn, fixing tractors, lawnmowers, anything that broke. It was their language, their way of keeping the world at bay. But Edenville wasn't kind to a girl like Emily. She was too smart, too curious, too stubborn. In high school, she aced math and physics, her homework covered in precise calculations and doodled rocket designs. The boys in her class didn't take kindly to being outshone. Brainiac, they'd called her, snickering as they shoved her books off her desk. Go back to your tractors, Harper. She'd learned to keep her head down, to let her grades speak louder than their taunts. The one person who saw her was Mrs. Clara Thompson, her high school physics teacher. Clara was a wiry woman with graying hair and a sharp wit, the kind of teacher who could make Newton's laws feel like a story. She'd caught Emily sketching a jet engine in the margins of her notebook one day and said, "You've got a gift, Emily. Don't let this town tell you otherwise." Clara had pushed her to apply for scholarships, to dream beyond Edenville's fields. When Emily won a full ride to MIT, Clara had been the first to hug her, whispering, "You're going to change the world." But MIT hadn't been the escape she'd hoped for. The classes were brutal, the workload relentless. Her classmates, mostly men, mostly confident to a fault, treated her like an anomaly. "You sure you're in the right major?" one had asked during a group project, his tone half joking, half cutting. Imposter syndrome crept in, whispering that she didn't belong, that Edenville's smallness had followed her. She'd spent late nights in the library, fueled by Red Bull and stubbornness, proving she could keep up. Her father hadn't helped. When she'd called to tell him about MIT, his voice had been proud but hesitant. "Engineering's a tough road, he'd said. Maybe something like teaching would be steadier." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they came from the man who'd taught her to love machines. He'd meant well, but he didn't understand. He'd never left Edenville, never seen the stars the way she did. Now, at SpaceX, Emily felt that same weight of doubt. Greg Larson's sneers echoed her high school bullies, her father's warnings, her own nagging fears. She glanced at the photo on her cubicle wall, her and Tom, standing in front of a freshly fixed tractor, both grinning despite the grease on their faces. She wished she could call him now, hear his gruff voice tell her she could do this. But they hadn't spoken in months, not since their last argument about her risky career choice. Her computer pinged, pulling her back to the present. An email from Greg, copied to the team, meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. to discuss the beast. Harper, bring your notes. Don't waste our time. The condescension dripped through the screen. She could picture his smirk, his polished loafers propped on his desk, his confidence unshakable. Greg had been at SpaceX for a decade, his name on half the patents in the propulsion lab. To him, Emily was a nuisance, a diversity hire who'd gotten lucky. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The beast schematic stared back at her, a tangle of lines and numbers that felt alive, taunting her. She didn't know where to start. The fuel injection system was the problem, everyone agreed on that, but the why was a mystery. The injectors misfired under high pressure, sending fuel into the combustion chamber unevenly. The result was catastrophic, vibrations that could tear the engine apart, grounding the rocket before it ever left Earth. Emily opened her notebook, flipping to a page of scribbled equations. Fluid dynamics had always been her strength, the way liquids and gases moved through systems, bending to the laws of physics. She'd spent hours at MIT modeling flows, predicting turbulence. If she could understand the beast's flow patterns, maybe she could find the flaw. But 30 days? It was insane. Even the senior engineers had given up on the beast, calling it a career killer. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Jake, labs open late. Wanna take a crack at the injector sims? She smiled, grateful for his optimism. Jake was an outsider like her, a kid from a rough LA neighborhood who'd clawed his way into SpaceX with grit and a knack for mechanics. He didn't care about titles or egos, he just wanted to build things that worked. Be there at 9, she texted back, her fingers steady now. She glanced at the photo of her and her dad again, her heart aching. She wished she could tell him about Musk's email, about the impossible challenge she'd accepted. Would he be proud, or would he tell her to play it safe? She didn't know. But she knew she couldn't quit, not now, not when she'd come this far. The office was quiet now, most of the team gone for the night. Emily packed her notebook and laptop, her mind racing. The beast was waiting, and so was Musk. She thought of Clara's words, "You're going to change the world." Maybe this was her chance. Maybe the beast wasn't just a machine, it was a test, a chance to prove she was more than the girl from nowhere. As she stepped out into the cool California night, the stars glittered above the SpaceX campus. Somewhere up there was Mars, the dream that drove Musk, that drove them all. Emily tightened her grip on her bag, her resolve hardening. She'd fix the beast. She'd prove them wrong. And she'd start tonight. The SpaceX conference room smelled of stale coffee and ambition, its glass walls reflecting the morning light streaming over the Hawthorne campus. Emily Harper sat at the far end of the long table, her notebook open to a page of scribbled equations, her laptop glowing with schematics of the beast's fuel injection system. The room buzzed with the low hum of conversation as her team filed in for the 8 a.m. meeting, their laptops and coffee mugs in hand. She adjusted her SpaceX jacket, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. This was her first chance to present her initial findings on the beast, and she knew Greg Larson was waiting for her to slip. Greg strode in last, his tailored blazer and polished loafers a stark contrast to Emily's worn boots and faded jeans. He was in his late 30s, with a sharp jawline and a smile that never reached his eyes. As the senior engineer leading the propulsion team, he carried himself like he owned the room, nodding to his allies, Mark, a wiry thermal analyst, and Sarah, a materials specialist who always deferred to him. He dropped into the chair at the head of the table, his gaze flicking to Emily with a smirk. "Ready to enlighten us, Harper?" he asked, his tone light but laced with condescension. Emily's fingers tightened around her pen. She'd spent the previous night in the lab with Jake Martinez, running simulations on the beast's fuel injectors until her eyes burned. They'd found something, a pattern in the misfires that suggested a pressure imbalance in the fuel lines. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding like it had back in her Edenville High School when she'd stood up to present a physics project to a room full of sneering classmates. "You've done this before," she told herself. "You can do it again." She stood, clicking her laptop to project the beast schematics onto the screen. "The issue is in the fuel injection system," she began, her voice steady despite the eyes boring into her. "The injectors are misfiring under high pressure, causing uneven combustion. My simulations suggest the pressure spikes are due to an imbalance in the fuel flow, possibly from a design flaw in the manifold." Greg leaned back, crossing his arms. "A design flaw," he repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "That manifold was tested for months. You're saying we missed something that obvious?" The room went quiet. Mark shifted uncomfortably, Sarah stared at her laptop. Emily's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. "The tests were under ideal conditions," she said. "Real-world variables, temperature fluctuations, vibration, could amplify a small flaw. I've got data showing pressure spikes at 80% thrust." Greg snorted. "Data from a junior engineer's late-night sims? Come on, Harper. This is the beast, not some high school science project. You're out of your depth." "Arts and science degree from MIT," she said, her voice sharp. "I know what I'm doing." Greg's smirk widened. "Do you?" "Because last I checked, the beast has been a problem for years. If it was that simple, we'd have fixed it by now." The words hit like a punch. Emily thought of her father's barn, the way he'd taught her to listen to machines, to find their secrets. She thought of Mrs. Clara Thompson, her high school teacher, saying, "Don't let them tell you otherwise." She wanted to snap back, to tell Greg she'd earned her place here. But the weight of his words, the room's silence, pressed down on her. She felt like that girl in Edenville again, her books scattered on the floor, the boys laughing. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Jake Martinez slipped in, his lanky frame moving quietly to a seat near her. He gave her a subtle nod, his dark eyes warm with encouragement. Jake was her lifeline at SpaceX, the mechanic who'd stayed late with her last night, tossing ideas back and forth over cold pizza. He'd grown up in a rough LA neighborhood, fixing cars to help his mom pay rent. Like Emily, he'd fought his way here, and his quiet belief in her was a flicker of light in the room's hostility. "Thanks for joining us, Martinez," Greg said, his tone mocking. "Hope you brought something more useful than Harper's theories." Jake grinned, unfazed. "Just here to learn, Larson. Maybe you'll surprise me." A few chuckles broke the tension, and Emily felt a spark of gratitude. She clicked to the next slide, showing her simulation data, graphs of pressure spikes, flow rates, and combustion patterns. "These numbers don't lie," she said. "The manifold's design assumes perfect conditions, but the real world isn't perfect. We need to test under variable loads and—" "Enough," Greg cut in, standing. "This is speculation, not science. I'm not wasting resources on a hunch from someone who's been here 5 minutes. We'll stick to proven methods." He turned to the team. "Mark, Sarah, let's focus on recalibrating the injectors. Harper, you can assist with data collection." "Assist." The word stung like a slap. Greg was sidelining her, reducing her to a glorified intern. She wanted to argue, to show them the simulations she and Jake had run, but the room was already moving on, Greg's voice drowning hers out as he delegated tasks. The meeting ended with her ideas dismissed, her notebook still open to equations nobody cared about. The humiliation burned, her confidence crumbling like the rusted bolts she'd once pried loose in her father's barn. She packed her laptop, avoiding eye contact as the team filed out. Greg lingered by the door, talking loudly with Mark about real priorities. She felt small, like she'd felt in high school, her dreams too big for her own good. Back at her cubicle, Emily sank into her chair, staring at the photo of her and her dad, their grins wide after fixing that old tractor. She could almost hear his voice, "Machines don't care who you are, Em." But Greg cared. The team cared. And their doubt was a weight she couldn't shake. Her phone buzzed, a call from Mrs. Clara Thompson, her old teacher. Emily hesitated, then answered, her voice shaky. "Mrs. Thompson." "Emily Harper." Clara's voice was warm, like a hug across the miles. "I saw your name in a SpaceX newsletter. Fixing rocket engines. I knew you'd change the world." Emily's throat tightened. "It's harder than I thought," she admitted. "Nobody here thinks I can do it." Clara laughed softly. "They said that about you in Edenville, too. Remember what I told you? You've got a gift. Don't let their noise drown out your voice." The words were a lifeline, a flicker of hope. Emily thought of the barn, the stars above Edenville, the way she'd felt unstoppable fixing that tractor. Clara was right, she'd been doubted before and come out stronger. She thanked her teacher, promising to call again soon, and hung up, her resolve hardening. She opened her laptop, pulling up the simulation data. The pressure spikes were real, the pattern clear. She wasn't wrong, no matter what Greg said. She texted Jake, "Lab tonight? Let's rerun those sims." His reply came instantly, "Hell yeah. 9 p.m. Bring coffee." She smiled, her fingers steady as she typed. The beast was a puzzle, and she was good at puzzles. But as she packed her bag, her phone pinged with another email from Greg, copied to the team, "Harper's theory is a non-starter. Focus on recalibration. No distractions." The words were a gut punch, a reminder that Greg wasn't just dismissing her, he was working to push her out. Emily's jaw tightened. She glanced at the cactus on her desk, Spike, still clinging to life despite her neglect. Like her, it was tougher than it looked. Greg thought he could bury her ideas, steal her shot at fixing the beast. He was wrong. She'd spent her life proving people wrong, from Edenville to MIT to SpaceX. This was just another challenge, another bolt to loosen. She slung her bag over her shoulder, her boots echoing as she headed for the lab. The beast was waiting, and so was her chance. Greg could smirk all he wanted. She'd show him, and everyone else, what she could do. The SpaceX lab was a maze of blinking monitors and humming equipment, its sterile walls lit by the cold glow of LED lights. Emily Harper hunched over a workstation at 9 p.m., her eyes burning from hours of staring at the beast's schematics. The rocket engine's digital model spun slowly on her screen, a tangle of fuel lines and injectors that seemed to mock her with its complexity. Her coffee cup. Her third of the night, sat cold beside her, next to a half-eaten slice of pizza Jake had brought. The lab was quiet except for the soft clatter of Jake's tools as he tinkered with a prototype injector across the room. Emily rubbed her temples, her mind racing. Greg Larson's email from earlier that day still stung, "Harper's theory is a non-starter. No distractions." He dismissed her pressure imbalance hypothesis without a second thought, rallying the team to focus on recalibrating the injectors, busy work that hadn't solved the beast's misfires in years. She had 28 days left to meet Elon Musk's challenge, and the clock was relentless. But she wasn't giving up. Not yet. She scrolled through an academic database, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She'd been digging for hours, chasing a hunch that the manifold's design was the root of the problem. The beast's fuel injection system was failing under high-pressure conditions, causing vibrations that could tear the engine apart. Her simulations with Jake the previous night had confirmed the pressure spikes, but they needed a specific flaw she could point to. Her eyes caught on a title buried in the search results, Turbulence-Induced Pressure Anomalies in High-Flow Systems, a 2018 paper from a German engineering journal. She clicked it open, scanning the abstract. The paper described how microturbulence in fuel manifolds could amplify pressure imbalances, especially in systems operating at extreme velocities. Her heart quickened. This could be it, the key to the beast's failure. "Hey, Jake," she called, her voice cutting through the lab's hum. "Come look at this." Jake Martinez wiped his hands on a rag and ambled over, his lanky frame casting a shadow across her screen. His dark hair was mussed, his SpaceX t-shirt stained with grease. "Find something?" he asked, leaning in. "This paper," Emily said, pointing to the screen. "It says microturbulence in the manifold could cause pressure spikes like the ones we're seeing. If the beast's design doesn't account for that, it explains the misfires." Jake squinted at the equations, his lips moving as he followed along. "Damn, Em. That's a hell of a catch. You think the manifold's geometry is off?" "Maybe," she said, her voice cautious but hopeful. "The design assumes laminar flow, but real-world conditions are messier. We'd need to model it to be sure." Jake grinned, his eyes lighting up. "Let's do it. I'll set up the sims if you pull the manifold specs." Emily nodded, a spark of excitement cutting through her exhaustion. For the first time since Musk's email, she felt like she was on the right track. She opened the beast's design files, diving into the manifold specs, pipe diameters, angles, flow rates. The numbers danced in her mind, a puzzle she could solve if she just kept pushing. But the weight of Greg's dismissal lingered. She could still hear his voice in the meeting, "You're out of your depth." He'd made it clear she was an outsider, a junior engineer who didn't belong in the big leagues. The memory of her high school bullies flashed through her mind, the boys who'd laughed when she'd presented her jet engine model, calling it cute. She'd proven them wrong at MIT, graduating with honors. She could prove Greg wrong, too. But the doubt gnawed at her, whispering that maybe he was right. Maybe the beast was too big for her. She shook it off, focusing on the screen. The German paper's equations were complex, but they made sense. She started coding a new simulation, incorporating turbulence factors the original design had ignored. Jake worked beside her, tweaking the injector prototype to test her theory. The lab felt alive, a bubble of possibility amidst the pressure of Musk's deadline. As the simulation ran, Emily's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Clara Thompson, her high school physics teacher, checked in with your dad. He's proud of you, even if he doesn't say it. Keep shining, Emily. The message hit like a warm breeze, softening the edges of her doubt. Clara had always believed in her, even when Emily hadn't believed in herself. And her dad, gruff, stubborn Tom Harper, proud? The thought fueled her, like a spark igniting kindling. She pictured the barn in Edenville, the stars above, the tractor humming back to life under her hands. She could do this. The simulation finished, and the results flashed on the screen, a 3D model of the manifold, with red zones indicating turbulence-induced pressure spikes. Emily's breath caught. "Jake, look at this," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "The turbulence is pooling here, at the manifold's bend. It's choking the fuel flow." Jake let out a low whistle. "That's it, Em. That's the crack we've been looking for. If we adjust the geometry, maybe smooth out that bend, we could stabilize the flow." Emily's heart raced. It wasn't a full solution, but it was a breakthrough. She scribbled notes, her mind already racing to the next step, redesigning the manifold, running physical tests. She felt like that 10-year-old in the barn again, wrench in hand, unstoppable. But as they saved the simulation, the lab door swung open with a bang. Greg Larson stood in the doorway, his blazer gone, his sleeves rolled up like he was ready for a fight. "What the hell are you two doing in here?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as he saw the screen. "I told you to focus on recalibration, Harper. Not wasting time on your little theories." Emily's stomach dropped. She stood, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. "This isn't a theory, Greg. We found evidence of turbulence in the manifold causing the pressure spikes. It's in the data." Greg crossed the room in 3 strides, leaning over her screen. His jaw tightened as he scanned the simulation, but his expression didn't soften. "You're chasing ghosts," he said. "This is a distraction. You're not authorized to run simulations without my approval." "Authorized?" Jake cut in, his tone sharp. "She's on the project, same as you. And this could actually fix the beast, unlike your recalibration nonsense." Greg's eyes flashed. "Watch it, Martinez. You're a wrench turner, not an engineer. And you," he turned to Emily, "are on thin ice. Keep this up, and I'll make sure Musk knows you're wasting company resources." Emily's fists clenched. She wanted to scream, to tell Greg he was wrong, that her data was solid. But the power dynamic was clear, he was the senior engineer, the one with the ear of the higher-ups. She was the nobody from Edenville, the one who'd been handed an impossible challenge. Doubt crept back in, cold and heavy. Greg stormed out, leaving the lab silent except for the hum of the equipment. Jake put a hand on her shoulder. "He's scared, Em," he said quietly. "You're onto something, and he knows it." Emily nodded, but the weight of Greg's threat lingered. She looked at the simulation, the red zones glowing like a warning. She'd found a crack in the beast's armor, but at what cost? Greg wasn't just dismissing her, he was gunning for her. And with 28 days left, every misstep could be her last. She thought of her father's barn, the way a single loose bolt could bring a machine to its knees. The beast was no different. She just had to find the right bolt, the right fix. She turned to Jake. "Let's keep going," she said, her voice firm. "We're not stopping." Jake grinned, grabbing his tools. "That's my girl." As they dove back into the work, Emily felt a flicker of that old fire, the one that had burned in her as a kid fixing tractors under the stars. Greg could try to bury her, but she'd keep digging. The beast was her puzzle, and she was going to solve it, no matter who stood in her way. The SpaceX lab was a sanctuary of chaos at 2 a.m., its air thick with the scent of burnt coffee and soldering flux. Emily Harper leaned over her workstation, her eyes gritty from lack of sleep, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she refined the turbulence model for the beast's manifold. The rocket engine schematics glowed on her screen, a digital maze of pipes and valves that seemed to pulse with defiance. Across the lab, Jake Martinez tinkered with a 3D, printed injector prototype, his tools clinking softly in the quiet. Empty pizza boxes and Red Bull cans littered the table between them, relics of their late-night grind. Emily's mind buzzed with the breakthrough from the previous night. The German research paper that had pointed to microturbulence as the cause of the beast's pressure spikes. She and Jake had spent hours tweaking the simulation, smoothing the manifold's bend to reduce turbulence. The results were promising, a 20% drop in pressure anomalies. It wasn't a fix yet, but it was a step closer to unraveling the engine's secrets. With 27 days left on Elon Musk's deadline, every step counted. But Greg Larson's threat hung over her like a storm cloud. "Keep this up, and I'll make sure Musk knows you're wasting resources." His words from the lab confrontation echoed in her mind, stirring memories of her high school days in Edenville, Pennsylvania, when bullies had mocked her for daring to dream big. She'd pushed through then, and she'd push through now. But the stakes were higher, her career, her place at SpaceX, her chance to prove she belonged. "Hey, Jake called, holding up the injector prototype. "Think this new angle will help with the flow?" She glanced over, her tired eyes focusing on the sleek metal piece. "Looks good," she said. "If we pair it with the manifold tweak, we might stabilize the combustion enough to test." Jake grinned, his dark eyes bright despite the hour. You're a machine, Harper. No wonder Musk picked you. Emily snorted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Musk probably just needed someone to throw under the bus when this fails. Nah, Jake said, setting the prototype down. He sees what I see. You've got that spark, same one I had fixing cars in my mom's garage. You don't quit. His words warmed her, easing the knot in her chest. Jake was her anchor in the storm of SpaceX's cutthroat culture. Like her, he'd fought his way up from nothing, a kid from a rough LA neighborhood who'd turned wrenches to pay bills. His belief in her felt like a lifeline, a reminder of Mrs. Clara Thompson's encouragement back in high school. You're going to change the world, Clara had said. Emily clung to that now, even as Greg's shadow loomed. She saved the simulation and leaned back, stretching her aching shoulders. The lab's hum was soothing, a contrast to the hostility of the team meetings. But as she reached for her coffee, her laptop pinged with an email. Her stomach dropped when she saw the sender, Greg Larson. The subject read, "Presentation tomorrow, stick to the plan." The email was curt, "Harper, your turbulence theory is unproven. Focus on recalibration data for tomorrow's update to the propulsion leads. No tangents." It was a power move, a reminder that Greg controlled the narrative. He'd scheduled a meeting with the senior propulsion team, and he wanted her to play the good little assistant, presenting his data while her breakthrough was buried. The humiliation stung, like standing in front of her high school class, her jet engine model mocked as cute. She wanted to scream, to march into Greg's office and shove her simulation in his face. But he held the reins, and one wrong move could end her. She showed the email to Jake, who rolled his eyes. "Guy's got a Napoleon complex," he said. "He's scared you're gonna steal his thunder." "He already has," Emily muttered, her voice tight. "If I don't present the turbulence data, we're wasting time on a dead-end approach." "Then present it," Jake said, leaning against the table. "Screw Greg. You've got the data. Show it to the leads. Let them decide." Emily hesitated. Defying Greg was a risk, she could be sidelined, or worse, fired. But staying silent meant letting the beast's flaw fester, letting Greg take credit for her work. She thought of her father, Tom, in his barn, teaching her to listen to machines. "They don't care who you are, Em." The beast didn't care about Greg's ego or her insecurities. It just needed to be fixed. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "I'll pitch the turbulence model tomorrow. But I need to nail this presentation." Jake fist bumped her. "That's my girl. I'll help you polish it." They worked until dawn, refining the slides, graphs of pressure spikes, 3D models of the manifold, excerpts from the German paper. Emily's confidence grew with each slide, her exhaustion giving way to excitement. This was her shot, her chance to prove she wasn't just the girl from nowhere. She thought of Clara's text from the previous night, "Your dad's proud, even if he doesn't say it." The thought fueled her, like the stars above Edenville had fueled her childhood dreams. By 7 a.m., the presentation was ready. Emily showered in the SpaceX locker room, swapped her jeans for a clean blouse, and rehearsed her talking points in front of a mirror. Her reflection looked tired but determined, her hazel eyes sharp with purpose. She could do this. She had to. The propulsion team meeting was held in a sleek conference room, its windows overlooking the Hawthorne test stands. The senior leads, Dr. Ellen Chen, a no-nonsense propulsion expert, and Mike Torres, a grizzled veteran of the Falcon program, sat at the head of the table. Greg took his usual spot, his polished demeanor masking his irritation as Emily set up her laptop. The rest of the team filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Emily started with Greg's recalibration data, her voice steady as she walked through the numbers. But when she reached the final slide, she took a deep breath and clicked to her turbulence model. "I've been running simulations on the manifold," she said, projecting the 3D model. Microturbulence is causing pressure spikes, which explains the misfires. If we adjust the geometry, we could stabilize the flow. The room went silent. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Mike scribbled a note. Greg's face reddened, but before he could speak, a figure appeared in the doorway, Elon Musk himself, his lanky frame filling the space. The team froze, the air electric with his presence. Interesting, Musk said, his voice casual but piercing. He stepped inside, his eyes locked on Emily's screen. Turbulence, huh? Walk me through it. Emily's heart pounded, but she seized the moment, explaining the German paper, the simulations, the manifold's flaw. Musk listened, his head tilted, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded, a small, cryptic gesture that sent a ripple of hope through her. Keep digging, he said, then turned and left as abruptly as he'd arrived. The room exhaled. Dr. Chen gave Emily a rare smile. Solid work, Harper. Run physical tests to confirm. Greg's jaw was tight, his eyes burning, but he said nothing. Emily's pulse raced with triumph. Musk had seen her work. He'd nodded. It wasn't a win, but it was validation. She glanced at Jake, who gave her a subtle thumbs up from the back of the room. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. But as the meeting ended, Greg cornered her by the coffee machine. You think you're clever, pulling that stunt, he hissed, his voice low so only she could hear. Musk may have bought your little show, but you're on my team. And I just got word, the leads are cutting your timeline. You've got 20 days now, not 30. Good luck with your turbulence theory. He walked away, leaving Emily frozen, the weight of his words crashing down. 20 days. The deadline had been insane at 30, now it was impossible. Her triumph evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. She thought of her father's barn, the way a single loose bolt could ruin everything. Greg was tightening the screws, and she was running out of time. She clutched her laptop, her resolve flickering but not gone. Musk's nod, Jake's support, her own data, they were glimmers of hope in the storm. She'd keep digging, just like he'd said. The beast wasn't unbeatable, and neither was Greg. The Texas sun blazed over the Boca Chica launch site, its heat shimmering off the asphalt and turning the horizon into a wavering mirage. Emily Harper stepped off the SpaceX shuttle, her boots crunching on the gravel as she squinted against the glare. The South Texas landscape was stark, flat, scrubby plains stretching toward the Gulf of Mexico, broken only by the gleaming silos and towering test stands of SpaceX's starbase. The air smelled of salt and rocket fuel, a strange mix that made her pulse quicken. This was where dreams of Mars became real, where engines roared to life or died in fiery failure. And now, with only 20 days left to fix the beast, it was where Emily would face her greatest test yet. She adjusted her backpack, heavy with her laptop and notebooks, and followed the group of engineers toward the main test facility. The beast, or rather, a full-scale prototype of its fuel injection system, waited in a hangar nearby, ready for the physical tests Dr. Ellen Chen had greenlit after Emily's presentation. Her turbulence model had convinced the propulsion leads, but theory was one thing, making it work in the real world was another. The memory of Elon Musk's cryptic nod lingered, a spark of validation that kept her going despite Greg Larson's latest blow, a slashed timeline that made an impossible task even harder. The Boca Chica facility was a world apart from the polished labs of Hawthorne. The test stands loomed like industrial giants, their steel framework scarred from countless engine firings. Cranes hauled components across the site, and the distant rumble of a test engine shook the ground. Emily's heart raced with a mix of awe and nerves. She'd grown up fixing tractors in a Pennsylvania barn, but this was different, raw, chaotic, alive. The beast wasn't just a schematic on her screen anymore, it was a physical monster, and she was here to tame it. Inside the hangar, the prototype gleamed under harsh lights, a scaled-down version of the beast's fuel system mounted on a test rig. Engineers bustled around it, their headsets crackling with instructions. Emily spotted Jake Martinez near the rig, his lanky frame bent over a control panel. He'd volunteered to join her in Boca Chica, a decision that had earned him a glare from Greg back in Hawthorne. "Ready to make some noise, Em?" Jake called, flashing his easy grin. "Ready to not blow anything up," she replied, forcing a smile. Her stomach churned. The simulations had shown promise, smoothing the manifold's bend reduced turbulence, but a real test was unforgiving. One miscalculation could mean a fireball, or worse, proof that Greg was right to doubt her. She set up her laptop, syncing it to the test rig's sensors. The plan was simple: run a low-pressure fuel flow through the modified manifold, measure the turbulence, and confirm her model. If it worked, they'd scale up to a full engine test. If it didn't, she'd be back to square one, with Greg's smirk waiting in the wings. As she calibrated the sensors, a memory flashed: her father, Tom, in their Edenville barn, teaching her to adjust a carburetor. "Feel the machine, Em," he'd said, his hands steady on hers. "It'll tell you what's wrong if you listen." She closed her eyes, imagining the beast as that old tractor, its hum a language she could learn. The thought grounded her, pushing back the weight of Greg's threat and the ticking clock. The test began with a low hum, the fuel pumps whirring as liquid coursed through the manifold. Emily watched the sensor data stream across her screen. Pressure levels, flow rates, turbulence metrics. The numbers held steady, the turbulence lower than expected. She exchanged a glance with Jake, who gave her a thumbs up from the control panel. "Looking good, Harper," he called. For a moment, she dared to hope. The manifold's new geometry was working, just like her simulations predicted. She pictured presenting the results to Dr. Chen, silencing Greg's taunts, proving to Musk she could do this. The stars above Edenville flashed in her mind, the ones she'd dreamed of reaching as a kid. Maybe this was her first step. But then the sensors blipped. A pressure spike, small at first, then sharp, flashed red on her screen. The hum turned to a whine, and the rig vibrated, a low rumble that set her teeth on edge. "Jake, cut the flow," she shouted, her heart lurching. Jake slammed the emergency stop, and the rig powered down with a groan. The hangar went silent, the engineers staring. Emily's screen showed the spike source, a secondary turbulence pocket, deeper in the manifold than her model had accounted for. Her stomach sank. The test hadn't failed outright, but it wasn't a success either. She'd missed something, and now she had a rig full of fuel and a room full of witnesses to her mistake. The lead test engineer, a gruff Texan named Hank, approached, his clipboard in hand. "What happened, Harper?" he asked, his tone more curious than accusing. "Your model was supposed to fix this." Emily swallowed, her throat dry. "There's another turbulence pocket," she said, pointing to the data. "The primary bend is stable, but there's a secondary flow issue. I'll need to adjust the model." Hank nodded, scribbling a note. "Not bad for a first run. Fix it and try again tomorrow." But his words didn't ease the sting. She'd come so close, only to hit another wall. Greg's voice echoed in her head, "You're out of your depth." She hated that he might be right. She and Jake stayed late, analyzing the data under the hangar's harsh lights. The Texas night pressed against the windows, the stars hidden by clouds. Jake tossed her a fresh Red Bull. "Don't beat yourself up, Em," he said. "We're closer than anyone's gotten." "You saw Hank's face, he's impressed." Emily cracked the can open, the fizz grounding her. Jake was right, this wasn't a failure, just a setback. The data showed where the turbulence was hiding, she could refine the model, adjust the manifold's secondary bend. She thought of Mrs. Clara Thompson, her high school teacher, saying, "You've got a gift." She thought of her father's barn, the satisfaction of a fixed engine roaring to life. She wasn't done yet. They worked until dawn, tweaking the model and prepping for another test. Emily's eyes burned, but her mind was sharp, fueled by the challenge. She emailed Dr. Chen a preliminary report, outlining the secondary turbulence issue and her plan to address it. The response came quickly: "Good catch, Harper. Keep pushing." The words were a lifeline, a reminder that someone believed in her, even if Greg didn't. But as the sun rose over Boca Chica, casting golden light across the test stands, a new email pinged in her inbox. It was from Greg, forwarded to the propulsion leads: "Harper's test results show instability. Recommend reassigning her to data analysis to avoid further delays." The words hit like a punch, her breath catching. He wasn't just undermining her, he was trying to pull her off the beast entirely. Emily's hands shook as she read the email again, her vision blurring. 20 days left, and Greg was tightening the noose. She pictured his smirk, his polished loafers, his certainty that she'd fail. The hangar felt smaller, the air heavier. She thought of her mother, Linda, walking out when she was 6, leaving a note that said, "I can't stay." Was this what it felt like to be abandoned? To fight for something only to have it ripped away? Jake leaned over, reading the email over her shoulder. "He's full of it," he said, his voice low with anger. "You're not going anywhere, Em. We've got this." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Jake's belief, Dr. Chen's support, her own data, they were enough to keep going. The beast was a puzzle, and she was close to cracking it. Greg could try to bury her, but she'd learned to dig herself out before, in Edenville, at MIT, and now here, under the Texas sun. She closed her laptop, her resolve hardening. "Let's prep the rig," she said. "We're testing again tonight." Jake grinned, grabbing his tools. "That's my girl." The test stands loomed outside, their steel frames catching the dawn light. Somewhere beyond them was Mars, the dream that drove SpaceX, that drove her. Emily tightened her grip on her backpack, the weight of her notebook grounding her. The beast wasn't just an engine, it was her chance to prove she belonged, to herself and everyone else. And she wasn't giving up. The Boca Chica test site thrummed with raw energy, its steel test stands glinting under the relentless Texas sun. Emily Harper stood in the control room, a concrete bunker overlooking the test pad where the beast's prototype fuel system was rigged for its second trial. The South Texas air was thick with the tang of rocket fuel and anticipation, the horizon shimmering with heat. Her laptop screen glowed with updated simulations, the manifold secondary bend now adjusted to account for the turbulence pocket that had derailed yesterday's test. With 19 days left on Elon Musk's impossible deadline, Emily felt the weight of every second, but the data gave her a flicker of hope. She adjusted her headset, her voice steady as she called out to the test crew. "Fuel pumps to 20% pressure. Let's start slow." The rig hummed to life, a low vibration rumbling through the bunker's floor. Jake Martinez stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the control panel's readouts. The other engineers, Hank, the gruff Texan lead, and a handful of technicians, watched the monitors, their faces tense. Yesterday's near miss had raised the stakes, another glitch could kill her credibility. The sensors streamed data, pressure levels, flow rates, turbulence metrics. Emily's heart pounded as the numbers held steady, the red warning zones from yesterday replaced by smooth green lines. The adjusted manifold was working, channeling the fuel with precision. She exchanged a glance with Jake, his grin a silent "we got this." For a moment, she let herself imagine success, the test succeeding, Dr. Chen's approval, Greg Larson's smirk wiped away. She pictured her father's barn in Edenville, Pennsylvania, the pride in his eyes when she'd fixed her first tractor. Maybe this was her moment. But then a shadow moved in the doorway, and the room went still. Elon Musk stepped into the control bunker, his lanky frame casual in a black SpaceX polo, his eyes sharp as they scanned the monitors. The crew stiffened, their chatter dying. Emily's stomach lurched. She hadn't expected him here, not in Boca Chica, not watching her test. His presence was electric, like a storm rolling in, and it threw her off balance. Harper, Musk said, his voice cutting through the hum of the equipment. Talk to me. Why's this test different? Emily swallowed, her mouth dry. We adjusted the manifold's secondary bend, she said, pointing to her screen. Yesterday's data showed a turbulence pocket. The new geometry should stabilize the flow. Musk leaned closer, his gaze flicking between her simulation and the test rig outside. Turbulence is a symptom, not the disease, he said, his tone matter-of-fact but piercing. What's causing it? Material stress. Thermal gradients. You're treating the effect, not the root. Her cheeks burned. She'd spent days on the turbulence model, poring over equations until her eyes ached. But Musk's question cut deeper, echoing her father's lessons in the barn. Feel the machine, Em. It'll tell you what's wrong. She hesitated, then said, the manifold's material might be deforming under high pressure. Titanium's tough, but thermal cycling could weaken it over time. Musk nodded, a faint quirk of his lips that could have been approval or amusement. Test that theory, he said. Run a material stress analysis. If you're right, you're closer. If you're wrong, you're learning. He turned to Hank. Push the test to 50% pressure. Let's see what breaks. Emily's heart sank. 50% was double what she'd planned, riskier, closer to the conditions where the beast had failed before. But she couldn't argue, not with Musk watching. She nodded to Jake, who adjusted the controls, his face tight with worry. The rig's hum grew louder, the vibration rattling her bones. The monitors showed a spike in pressure, but the turbulence stayed low. She held her breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the console. Then it happened, a sharp clang echoed from the rig, followed by a hiss of escaping fuel. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the monitors. Shut it down. Hank shouted, and Jake hit the emergency stop. The rig powered down, leaving a tense silence. Emily's screen showed the culprit, a hairline crack in the manifold's secondary bend, likely from material stress under the increased pressure. Her stomach twisted. The test had failed, again. She could feel the crew's eyes on her, their doubts mirroring Greg's back in Hawthorne. Musk was still there, his expression unreadable, and she braced for a reprimand. She thought of her father, his gruff voice when she'd botched a repair. Mistakes teach you, Em. Keep going. But this wasn't a tractor. This was SpaceX, and she was running out of time. Musk stepped closer, his voice low so only she could hear. Failure's data, Harper. You found a crack, good. Now find out why it cracked. You're not here to play it safe. He clapped her shoulder, a gesture so brief it barely registered, then left the bunker without another word. The crew exhaled, the tension easing. Hank approached, his clipboard in hand. Not a bad run, he said, his drawl softening. You caught the crack before it blew. That's something. Jake gave her a nod, his eyes warm with encouragement. Told you, Em. You're onto it. Emily's chest loosened, Musk's words echoing, you're not here to play it safe. It wasn't praise, but it was permission to keep pushing. She thought of her father, his tough love lessons in the barn. Tom Harper had never coddled her, always pushing her to figure out why things broke. Musk was the same, demanding, relentless, but seeing something in her she wasn't sure she saw herself. The memory of her father stirred mixed emotions, pride in his teachings, pain from their strained relationship. They hadn't spoken in months, not since she'd snapped at him for doubting her career. But his lessons were in her bones, guiding her now. She and Jake dove into the post-test analysis, the bunker's hum a backdrop to their work. The data showed the crack forming under thermal stress, just as she'd suspected. The titanium alloy was strong but not invincible, repeated heating and cooling had weakened it. She scribbled notes, her mind racing with ideas, a new alloy, maybe a composite coating to handle the thermal load. It was a long shot, but it was a path forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in hues of orange and pink. Emily stepped outside for air. The test stands stood silent, their silhouettes stark against the fading light. She thought of her father again, his hands guiding hers over a tractor engine, his voice steady, "Machines don't care who you are." But Musk cared. He'd challenged her, watched her, pushed her to dig deeper. It was daunting, but it was also a spark. She wasn't invisible here, not to him. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jake, "Got a lead on a new alloy. Lab tomorrow at 6 a.m. She smiled, typing back, "You're on. Bring coffee." Jake's support was a lifeline, a reminder she wasn't alone. She thought of Mrs. Clara Thompson, her high school teacher, who'd seen her potential when no one else had. "Keep shining," Clara had said. Emily felt that shine now, faint but growing. But as she headed back to the shuttle, her laptop bag heavy on her shoulder, she overheard two technicians talking near the hangar. "Heard Larson's pushing to take over the Beast project," one said. "Says Harper's out of her league, and this crack proves it." The words hit like a punch, stirring the same doubts she'd felt in Edenville, in MIT's lecture halls, in SpaceX's conference rooms. Greg was still out there, scheming to bury her, and now he had ammunition. Emily's jaw tightened. She pictured the stars above Edenville, the ones she'd dreamed of reaching as a kid. Greg could scheme all he wanted. She'd faced worse. Musk had told her to keep digging, and that's what she'd do. The Beast was her puzzle, and she was closer then. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The Boca Chica test site buzzed with tension under a slate-gray Texas sky, the air heavy with the threat of rain. Emily Harper stood in a control bunker, her hands gripping the console as the hum of the Beast's prototype fuel system filled the room. The test rig outside gleamed under floodlights, its modified manifold fitted with a new titanium composite to withstand thermal stress. 18 days remained on Elon Musk's deadline, and Emily's heart pounded with the weight of it. Last night's data had been promising, her adjusted model showed reduced turbulence, but today's test at 70% pressure would push the system to its limits. Jake Martinez stood beside her, his lanky frame hunched over the control panel, his eyes flicking between readouts. "Ready when you are, Em," he said, his voice steady but tight. The crew, Hank, the gruff test lead, and a dozen technicians, watched their monitors, the silence thick with anticipation. Emily's laptop glowed with sensor data, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She'd spent the night refining the manifold's design, incorporating a new alloy based on Jake's lead. It had to work. It had to. "Start the pumps," she called, her voice cutting through the bunker's hum. The rig roared to life, fuel coursing through the manifold, the vibration rattling her bones. The monitors showed steady pressure, the turbulence metrics in the green. Emily's breath caught, a flicker of hope sparking. She pictured her father's barn in Edenville, Pennsylvania, the satisfaction of a tractor engine purring after a long fix. Maybe this was it. The moment she'd prove Greg Larson wrong, prove she belonged at SpaceX. The sensors held steady for 30 seconds, then 40. Jake flashed her a grin, his dark eyes bright. "Looking solid, Harper," he whispered. Hank nodded from across the room, his clipboard lowered. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt like she was winning. Then it happened, a sharp crack echoed from the rig, followed by a screech of metal. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the monitors. "Pressure spike!" Jake shouted, slamming the emergency stop. The rig shut down with a groan, the bunker falling silent except for the hiss of cooling metal outside. Emily's screen showed a catastrophic failure, a fracture in the manifold's primary junction, worse than yesterday's crack. The new alloy hadn't held. Her stomach plummeted, the air sucked out of the room. The crew's eyes were on her, their silence deafening. Hank approached, his face grim. "That's 2 failures in a row, Harper," he said, not unkindly. What went wrong? Emily's throat tightened. The alloy, she said, her voice hoarse. It should have handled the thermal load, but the junction's design amplified the stress. I missed it. The admission burned, her confidence crumbling. She thought of Greg's email, his smug certainty that she was out of her depth. This failure was his ammunition, proof she couldn't handle the beast. Hank scribbled a note. Figure it out by tomorrow, or we're scaling back your role. He walked away, leaving Emily frozen, her hands shaking. She glanced at Jake, hoping for his usual optimism, but even he looked shaken, his jaw tight as he stared at the monitors. The bunker cleared out, the crew murmuring about the failure as they left. Emily sank into a chair, her laptop screen glowing with the damning data. She thought of her high school bullies in Edenville, laughing as her books hit the floor. She thought of her MIT professors, their raised eyebrows when she spoke up in class. And she thought of her father, Tom, his gruff voice. Mistakes teach you, Em. But this wasn't a mistake she could afford, not with 18 days left and Greg circling like a vulture. Jake sat beside her, tossing a stress ball between his hands. We're close, Em, he said, his voice softer than usual. The alloy was a good call, it just needs tweaking. Maybe a different composite? Emily nodded, but the weight of the failure pressed down. She opened her notebook, flipping to a page of old sketches, her father's handwriting, from a summer when they'd rebuilt a tractor engine together. The memory was vivid, the barn's creaky walls, the smell of oil, Tom's steady hands guiding hers. Machines don't care who you are, he'd said. But they cared if you failed, and she had, spectacularly. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the memory. A text from Mrs. Clara Thompson, her high school physics teacher, heard you're at Starbase. Your dad's been talking about you at the diner, says you're doing big things. Keep going, Emily. The words hit like a lifeline, stirring a warmth in her chest. Her dad, proud. They hadn't spoken in months, their last call ending in a fight over her risky career. But Clara's text sparked something, a reminder of the girl who'd fixed tractors under the stars, who dreamed of rockets despite Edenville's doubts. Emily opened her father's old notebook, its pages worn from years in the barn. Tucked between equations was a sketch of an adaptive fuel system, a concept Tom had toyed with for a truck engine. It was crude, but the idea, dynamic valves to adjust flow under stress, clicked with her. Jake, she said, her voice steadying. Look at this. What if we added adaptive valves to the manifold? They could compensate for thermal stress. Jake leaned over, his eyes lighting up. Old school genius, he said, tracing the sketch. Your dad's a badass. Let's model it. They dove into the work, the bunker's hum fading into the background. Emily coded a new simulation, integrating the adaptive valve concept, while Jake mocked up a prototype design. The idea felt right, like a puzzle piece snapping into place. She thought of Musk's words, failure's data, Harper. This failure had shown her the junction's weakness, her father's sketch might show her the fix. As dawn broke over Boca Chica, painting the test stands in soft gold, Emily's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her dad's number. Her heart skipped. They hadn't spoken since their fight, and the timing felt uncanny, like he'd sensed her struggle across the miles. She hesitated, then answered, her voice cautious. Dad? Tom's voice was gruff, strained. Clara said you're in Texas, working on some big rocket. That true? Yeah, she said, her throat tight. It's tough, Dad. He was quiet for a moment, then said, you always were stubborn. Like me. Don't quit, okay? The words were simple, but they hit hard, a bridge across their months of silence. She wanted to tell him about the beast, the test failures, Musk's challenge. But before she could, he coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made her stomach drop. You okay, Dad? She asked. Just a cold, he said, but his voice was weak. Gotta go, Em. Make me proud. The call ended, leaving her staring at the phone. Something was wrong, she could hear it in his voice, the same way she could hear a misfiring engine. Her father wasn't one to admit weakness, but that cough, that strain, set her nerves on edge. She thought of her mother, Linda, walking out when she was 6, leaving a note that broke Tom's heart. Was he hiding something now, the way he'd hidden his pain then? Jake noticed her expression. You good, Em? My dad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't sound right. I need to check on him. Jake nodded, his eyes soft. Go. I'll hold down the fort. We'll run the new Sims when you're back. Emily shook her head. I can't leave, not with the deadline, not with Greg trying to pull me off the project. She showed him the email from yesterday, Greg's push to reassign her. The threat was real, another failure, and he'd have the leverage to bury her. You're not alone, Em, Jake said. I've got your back. And your dad's sketch. That's gold. We'll make it work. She nodded, clinging to his words. But as she packed her laptop, the weight of the failure, Greg's sabotage, and her father's call pressed down. She pictured the stars above Edenville, the ones she'd dreamed of reaching. The beast was her chance to get there, but now her father's voice, a cough, a strain, pulled her back. She couldn't be in two places at once, but she couldn't abandon either fight. The Texas sky darkened, raindrops pattering against the bunker's windows. Emily slung her bag over her shoulder, her resolve fraying but not broken. The beast was a puzzle, her father was a mystery, and Greg was a threat. She'd face them all, one way or another. But first, she needed to know her dad was okay. The plane's engines droned as Emily Harper stared out the window, the patchwork fields of Pennsylvania unfolding below like a quilt from her childhood. The Texas sun of Boca Chica felt a world away, replaced by the gray drizzle of a late spring evening in Edenville. Her father's voice from their last call, a gruff, strained rasp punctuated by that rattling cough, echoed in her mind, pulling her back to the town she'd left behind. With 17 days left to fix the beast, leaving SpaceX's starbase was a risk, but the fear in Tom Harper's voice had been louder than the ticking clock. Emily's laptop sat in her bag, stuffed with simulation files and notes on the adaptive valve design she'd sketched from her father's old notebook. Jake Martinez was holding down the fort in Boca Chica, running tests on the new manifold prototype, but Greg Larson's shadow loomed. His email pushing to reassign her still burned in her memory, a reminder that every moment away from the project gave him leverage. Yet here she was, on a red-eye flight to Pittsburgh, then a rental car to Edenville, driven by a gut feeling that her dad needed her. The rental car smelled of cheap air freshener, its wipers squeaking against the rain as she drove the winding roads to Edenville. The town hadn't changed, same faded diner sign, same rusted water tower, same sleepy streets lined with clapboard houses. Her childhood home was a small farmhouse on the edge of town, its white paint peeling, its porch sagging under years of neglect. As she pulled into the gravel driveway, her headlights caught the barn in the back, its redwood weathered but standing firm. The sight hit her like a memory, summer nights fixing tractors with her dad, the smell of oil and hay, the stars bright above. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding. "Dad," she called, her voice soft in the rain. The door creaked open, and there was Tom Harper, taller than she remembered, but thinner, his flannel shirt hanging loose, his face pale under a weak stubble. His eyes, the same hazel as hers, lit up with surprise, then softened. "Em," he said, his voice rough. "Didn't expect you." He coughed, a deep, wet sound that made her chest tighten. "You sounded bad on the phone," she said, stepping inside. The house smelled of coffee and old wood, the living room cluttered with tools and car magazines. "You okay?" "Just a bug," he said, waving her off, but he sank into a worn armchair with a grimace. You didn't have to come all the way from Texas. Emily set her bag down, her eyes scanning him. He looked older, frielier, nothing like the sturdy mechanic who'd taught her to wrench bolts. I wanted to, she said, her voice catching. I needed to see you. Tom grunted, avoiding her gaze. Their last call had been a fight, her snapping at his caution about her risky SpaceX job, him hanging up without a goodbye. The silence since had been a wound, one she hadn't realized hurt until now. She thought of her mother, Linda, walking out when she was 6, leaving a note that broke Tom's heart. Emily had spent her life trying to fill that gap, fixing things with him in the barn, but she'd never quite reached him. She sat across from him, the rain pattering against the windows. I'm working on a rocket engine, she said, breaking the silence. It's called the Beast. It's a mess, but I'm close to fixing it. Tom's eyes flickered with interest, the old mechanic in him waking up. Rocket engine, huh? Tough job. Yeah, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Tougher than your old John Deere. He chuckled, then coughed again, his hand gripping the armrest. Emily's stomach nodded. Dad, you need to see a doctor, she said. That cough's not just a bug. I'm fine, he snapped, but his voice was weak. Don't fuss over me. You've got your rocket to worry about. Emily bit her lip, torn between pushing him and respecting his stubbornness. She thought of Boca Chica, the test rig's failure, Greg's email. She couldn't stay long, not with 17 days left and her career on the line. But leaving felt wrong, like abandoning the man who taught her everything. She set up her laptop on the kitchen table, its glow a stark contrast to the dim house. The simulation files loaded, showing the adaptive valve design she'd pulled from Tom's sketch. It was a long shot, but the concept, valves that adjusted flow dynamically under stress, could stabilize the beast's manifold. She emailed Jake, asking him to prep a prototype for testing, then dove into the data, her mind split between equations and her father's labored breathing in the next room. The house was a time capsule, every corner sparking memories. The kitchen clock ticked like it had when she was a kid, sneaking cookies while Tom worked late in the barn. The living room couch sagged where they'd watched old sci-fi movies, dreaming of spaceships. But there were ghosts, too, her mother's absence, the note she'd left, I'm sorry. I can't stay. Emily had buried that pain, but seeing her dad now, frail and stubborn, brought it back. Her phone buzzed, a reply from Jake, prototypes ready. Sims look good. You're killing it, Em. She smiled, his optimism a lifeline across the miles. Then another message, from Dr. Ellen Chen, your valve idea has potential. Test it when you're back. Focus on family for now. The words were a balm, easing the guilt of leaving Boca Chica. She glanced at Tom, now dozing in his chair, and felt a surge of resolve. She'd fix the beast, but she'd fix this, too, her and her dad, the years of silence. She stepped into the barn, the familiar smell of oil and hay washing over her. Tom's old toolbox sat in the corner, his notebook tucked inside. She flipped it open, tracing his sketch of the adaptive valve. It was rough, meant for a truck, but the principle was sound. She imagined him sketching it late at night, his hands steady despite the pain of Linda's leaving. He'd never stopped tinkering, just like she hadn't stopped fighting. Maybe they were more alike than she'd thought. She worked late, the rain a steady drumbeat outside. The valve simulation showed promise, flow stabilized under high pressure, turbulence reduced. She emailed Jake updates, her fingers flying as she balanced equations and worry for her dad. Around midnight, Tom shuffled into the kitchen, his cough quieter but still there. Still at it? He asked, nodding at her laptop. Always, she said, meeting his eyes. Like you taught me. He grunted, a faint smile breaking through. Stubborn kid. He paused, then added, I'm proud of you, Em. Always was. The words hit like a wave, warm and overwhelming. She wanted to hug him, to bridge the gap of months, but his cough cut through, sharp and wet. Her heart sank. "Dad, I'm calling a doctor tomorrow," she said, her voice firm. "No arguments." He waved her off, but his eyes were softer, like he knew she wouldn't budge. As he shuffled back to bed, Emily's phone buzzed again, an email from Greg Larson, copied to the propulsion leads. "Harper's absence is delaying progress. Recommend reassigning her to data support to ensure project continuity." The words were a knife, twisting the dread in her gut. Greg wasn't just undermining her, he was using her trip to Edenville to push her out entirely. She stared at the screen, the rain louder now, like the ticking of Musk's deadline. Her dad's cough echoed from the hallway, each rasp a reminder of why she was here. The beast was her puzzle, but Tom was her anchor. She couldn't fail either, but the weight of both was crushing. She thought of the stars above Edenville, the ones she'd dreamed of reaching. They felt far away now, but she wasn't done fighting, not for her dad, not for the beast, not for herself. The Edenville farmhouse creaked under the weight of a rainy Pennsylvania dawn, its windows streaked with drizzle that blurred the world outside. Emily Harper sat at the kitchen table, her laptop glowing with simulations of the beast's adaptive valve design, her coffee cold from hours of work. The clock on the wall ticked past 5 a.m., each second a reminder of the 16 days left to meet Elon Musk's deadline. Her father, Tom, slept upstairs, his cough quieter after a doctor's visit she'd insisted on the day before. The diagnosis, pneumonia, treatable but serious, had shaken her, anchoring her to this house even as Greg Larson's latest email threatened to pull her off the beast. Emily rubbed her eyes, exhaustion seeping into her bones. She'd spent the night balancing remote work on the rocket engine and worry for her dad, emailing Jake Martinez updates on the valve design while checking Tom's fever. The adaptive valve, inspired by her father's old sketch, was showing promise in simulations, stabilizing fuel flow under high pressure, but she needed real-world data, and that meant getting back to Boca Chica. But leaving Tom now felt impossible, like abandoning the man who'd taught her to fix machines, to never quit. She glanced at the barn through the kitchen window, its red silhouette faint in the pre-dawn light. Memories flooded back, summer nights with Tom, their hands greasy as they rebuilt tractor engines, the stars above Edenville sparking her dreams of rockets. Those dreams had carried her to MIT, to SpaceX, to the beast. But they'd also built a wall between her and her dad, their last fight, her snapping at his caution about her career, still raw. His words from yesterday, "I'm proud of you, Em," had softened the edges, but the gap remained. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jake, "Valve sims are killer. Prototypes ready for testing. When you back?" She typed a quick reply, "Soon. Dad's sick, but I'm working remotely." Then returned to her laptop. The simulation showed the valve adjusting flow dynamically, reducing turbulence by 30%. It was a breakthrough, but it needed a physical test, and Greg's email from last night loomed, "Harper's absence is delaying progress." He was pushing to reassign her, and every day in Edenville gave him more ammunition. Needing a break, Emily wandered into the living room, the floorboards creaking under her boots. The space was a museum of her childhood, faded photos on the mantel, Tom's toolbox in the corner, a stack of car magazines. She paused at a bookshelf, its shelves sagging with old manuals and knickknacks. A small wooden box caught her eye, tucked behind a dusty almanac. It was carved with her initials, a gift she'd made for Tom in middle school shop class. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a stack of envelopes, yellowed with age, addressed to her in a handwriting she didn't recognize. Her breath caught as she read the return address, Linda Harper. Her mother. The woman who'd walked out when Emily was 6, leaving a note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't stay." Emily's hands trembled as she opened the first letter, dated a year after Linda left. "Dear Emily," it began, "I know you're too young to understand, but I love you. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done. I wasn't strong enough to stay, but I think of you every day." The words blurred as tears stung Emily's eyes. There were dozens of letters, spanning years, birthday wishes, apologies, stories of Linda's life in Seattle, her regrets. "I hope one day you'll forgive me." The discovery hit like a tidal wave, shattering the walls Emily had built around her mother's absence. Tom had hidden these letters, keeping Linda's love from her. Why? Anger surged, mixed with grief. She thought of the barn, the nights she and Tom had spent fixing things to avoid the pain of Linda's leaving. Had he buried these letters to protect her, or to protect himself? She stormed upstairs, the box clutched in her hands. Tom was awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, his face pale but alert. He said, his voice rough. "What's wrong?" She held up the box, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years, you let me think she didn't care." Tom's eyes widened, then dropped to the floor. I couldn't," he said, his voice breaking. "She hurt us, I thought it was better if you didn't know she was still out there, writing letters she'd never send." "Never send?" Emily's voice cracked. "She sent them to you. You hid them. I deserve to know." Tom coughed, his shoulders hunching. "I was trying to protect you," he said. "You were so young, and she broke your heart. I didn't want her to do it again." The words hit hard, a mix of love and betrayal. Emily sank onto the bed, the letters spilling across the quilt. She thought of her childhood, the hole Linda's absence had left, the way she'd thrown herself into machines to fill it. Tom had been there, teaching her, loving her in. Tom reached for her hand, his grip weak but warm. "I'm sorry, he said, his eyes wet. "I was wrong. I thought I was doing right by you, but I messed up." Emily's anger softened, her tears falling. She saw the pain in his face, the weight of years carrying that secret. "Why now?" she asked. "Why keep them?" "Because I couldn't let go," he said. "I loved her, too. And you're so much like her, stubborn, brilliant. I didn't want you to hate her, but I didn't know how to let her back in." The confession broke something open in Emily. She hugged him, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. For the first time in years, she felt the gap between them close, the silence replaced by truth. Tom coughed again, but he held her tight, his strength still there despite his illness. "You're doing big things, he whispered. "Don't let my mistakes stop you." The moment grounded her, like the hum of a fixed engine. She thought of the beast, the adaptive valve design inspired by Tom's sketch. Her mother's letters, her father's apology, they were painful, but they were also a reminder of her resilience. She'd survived Linda's leaving, Tom's doubts, her own insecurities. She could survive Greg Larson and the beast. Back at the kitchen table, Emily opened her laptop, her mind sharp despite the emotional storm. The valve simulation stared back, its numbers a puzzle she could solve. Inspired by her father's sketch and her mother's letters, proof of love she hadn't known existed, she tweaked the design, adding a feedback loop to the valves to handle thermal stress dynamically. The simulation ran, the results stunning, turbulence reduced by 40%, pressure stable at 80% thrust. It was a breakthrough, a real chance to fix the beast. She emailed Jake the updated design, her heart racing. "Test this ASAP. I'm back tomorrow." The letters lay beside her, a painful but grounding weight. She'd face her mother's absence later, but for now, she had a rocket to save and a father to care for. But as she packed her laptop, her phone pinged with an email from Greg Larson, copied to the propulsion leads. "Harper's valve design is untested and risky. I've submitted my own proposal to stabilize the beast. Recommend moving forward with mine." The words were a gut punch, her breakthrough stolen before she could test it. Greg had seen her simulation files, likely accessed through the shared server, and was claiming her idea as his own. Emily's hands shook, rage and betrayal surging. She pictured Greg's smirk, his polished loafers, his certainty she'd fail. The letters, her father's cough, the ticking deadline, it was too much. But as she looked at Tom's notebook, its pages worn from years of love and loss, she felt a fire ignite. Greg could steal her design, but he couldn't steal her fight. She'd built her life proving people wrong, and she wasn't stopping now. The rain slowed outside, the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds. Emily clutched the letters, her resolve steeling. The beast was her puzzle, her father was her anchor, and Greg was just another obstacle. She'd fight for all of it, no matter the cost. The Boca Chica launch site roared with the pulse of machinery, its test stands gleaming under a fierce Texas sun. Emily Harper stepped off the SpaceX shuttle, her boots crunching on the gravel, her heart still heavy from the revelations in Edenville. The discovery of her mother's letters and her reconciliation with her father, Tom, had left her raw but resolute, their emotional weight now tangled with the professional fight ahead. With 15 days left to meet Elon Musk's deadline to fix the beast, Emily's breakthrough, the adaptive valve design inspired by her father's sketch, was her best shot. But Greg Larson's email, claiming her idea as his own, burned in her mind like a fuse ready to ignite. The Starbase facility was a hive of activity, cranes hauling components, engineers in headsets barking orders, the distant rumble of a test engine shaking the ground. Emily slung her laptop bag over her shoulder, the weight of her simulations grounding her as she headed for the test hangar. Jake Martinez was waiting, his lanky frame leaning against a toolbox, his grin wide but tinged with urgency. "Welcome back, Em," he said, tossing her a Red Bull. "You okay?" "Barely," she admitted, cracking the can open. "Dad's on antibiotics, but he's stubborn as ever." "And Greg," she trailed off, her jaw tightening as she showed Jake the email on her phone, "Harper's valve design is untested and risky. I've submitted my own proposal to stabilize the beast." Jake's eyes narrowed. "He stole your design. That's low, even for him." "He saw my files on the shared server," Emily said, her voice tight with anger. "He's pitching it as his to the propulsion leads. If I don't fight this, I'm done." Jake clapped her shoulder. "Then we fight. Your valve's the real deal. Let's prove it." The hangar was a cathedral of steel, the beast's prototype fuel system mounted on a test rig under harsh floodlights. The adaptive valve, Emily's design, now claimed by Greg, was installed, ready for its first physical test. The sight of it stirred a mix of pride and fury. She'd built that design from her father's sketch, from nights in the Edenville barn, from her own stubborn refusal to quit. Greg wasn't taking that from her. She set up her laptop, syncing it to the rig's sensors, while Jake checked the valve's alignment. The crew bustled around them, Hank, the gruff test lead, barking orders. Emily's stomach churned, she'd missed yesterday's prep, leaving Jake to handle the prototype alone. Greg's email had likely painted her absence as proof of her incompetence, and now he was poised to steal her breakthrough. The test began with a low hum, fuel pumps whirring as liquid coursed through the manifold. Emily watched the sensor data stream across her screen, pressure steady, turbulence low, the adaptive valve adjusting flow dynamically. Her heart raced. The numbers were better than the simulations, the valve compensating for thermal stress like she'd hoped. Jake flashed her a thumbs up, his grin infectious. "It's working, Em," he called. For a moment, she let herself believe. The valve was her idea, her father's legacy, her ticket to proving she belonged at SpaceX. She pictured presenting the results to Dr. Ellen Chen, silencing Greg's smug certainty, earning Musk's respect. She thought of her dad, his frail voice saying, "I'm proud of you, Em." This was her moment. But as the test hit 80% pressure, the hangar door swung open, and Greg Larson strode in, his polished loafers clicking on the concrete. He carried a tablet, his expression smug as he joined Hank at the control console. "Harper," he said, his voice loud enough for the crew to hear. "Didn't expect you back." My valve design seems to be performing well. Emily's blood boiled. Your design, she snapped, stepping toward him. I built that valve, Greg. You saw my files on the server and stole them. The crew went quiet, their eyes darting between them. Hank raised an eyebrow, his clipboard lowering. Greg's smirk didn't falter. Careful, Harper, he said. Accusing a senior engineer without proof? That's a bold move for someone already on thin ice. Emily's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. She thought of Edenville, the boys who'd mocked her jet engine model, the MIT classmates who'd dismissed her. Greg was no different, just another bully trying to bury her. But this time, her work was on that rig, humming with promise. She wasn't backing down. Check the server logs, she said, her voice steady despite her rage. My files are time-stamped. I was working on the valve design in Pennsylvania, days before your so-called proposal. Greg's eyes flickered, a crack in his confidence. Server logs prove nothing, he said. Ideas float around. I refined the concept, made it viable. Refined? Emily's voice rose, drawing the crew's attention. You copied my equations, my schematics, my father's sketch. You didn't refine anything, you stole it. Hank stepped in, his drawl firm. Enough. Harper, if you've got proof, show it. Larson, you better have something to back your claim. Emily's heart pounded. She had the simulations, the emails to Jake, the timestamps, but would it be enough? Greg's seniority gave him credibility she lacked, and his charm had the leads eating out of his hand. She thought of her mother's letters, hidden by her father to protect her, and the pain of that betrayal. She wouldn't let Greg hide her truth. Before she could respond, Jake jogged over, his phone in hand. Got something, he said, his voice low but urgent. He showed her the screen, a screenshot of the server logs, showing Emily's files uploaded days before Greg's proposal. Better yet, an email thread between her and Jake, dated from Edenville, detailing the valve design. I pulled these while you were setting up, he whispered. He can't weasel out of this. Emily's chest loosened, gratitude flooding her. Jake was her lifeline, as always, his quick thinking cutting through Greg's lies. She turned to Hank, holding up Jake's phone. This proves the valve is mine, she said. Timestamps, emails, everything. Greg's proposal came after I shared my files. Hank took the phone, his eyes scanning the evidence. Greg's smirk faded, his jaw tightening. This is a misunderstanding, he said, his voice smooth but strained. I was working from team data. Harper's contributions were foundational. Foundational? Emily snapped, her anger spilling over. I built that design from scratch, from my dad's sketch. You didn't contribute, you stole. The crew murmured, the air electric with tension. Hank handed Jake's phone back, his expression unreadable. We'll review this with Dr. Chen, he said. Harper, finish the test. Larson, step back until we sort this out. Greg's face reddened, but he nodded, retreating to the edge of the hangar. Emily turned back to the monitors, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. The test resumed, the valve holding steady at 85% pressure, the data glowing green. The crew cheered quietly, Hank giving her a nod. It wasn't a win yet, but it was close. As the test wrapped, Jake pulled her aside, his grin wide. You nailed it, Em. The valve's a game changer, and we've got Greg on the ropes. Emily managed a smile, but the victory felt fragile. She thought of her dad, his cough, his pride, the letters from her mother that had torn open old wounds. The valve was working, but Greg's sabotage wasn't over. He'd fight back, and with 15 days left, she couldn't afford to falter. As she packed her laptop, an email from Dr. Chen pinged, Harper, Larson's proposal has been flagged for review. Present your valve data tomorrow to the propulsion leads. Be ready to defend it. The words were a lifeline, but also a warning. Greg wasn't done, he'd charm, lie, or twist the truth to save himself. And if he won, her breakthrough, her father's legacy, her place at SpaceX would be gone. Emily gripped her bag, the Texas sun hot on her neck. She pictured the stars above Edenville, the ones she'd dreamed of reaching. Greg could fight dirty, but she'd fought harder, through bullies, doubts, and heartbreak. The beast was her puzzle, and she was one step closer to solving it. She just had to keep standing, no matter what came next. The Boca Chica test site was a theater of fire and steel, its massive test stand silhouetted against a blazing Texas sunset. Emily Harper stood in the control bunker, her heart pounding as she stared through the reinforced window at the beast, SpaceX's full-scale rocket engine, no longer a prototype but the real thing, rigged for its most critical test yet. The engine loomed like a sleeping giant, its titanium pipes and gleaming valves catching the fading light. With 14 days left on Elon Musk's deadline, this test of Emily's adaptive valve design was her last chance to prove she could fix the unfixable. The bunker buzzed with tension, monitors flickering with data, engineers and headsets murmuring final checks. Jake Martinez stood beside her, his lanky frame tense as he adjusted the control panel. "All systems green, M," he said, his voice steady but his eyes sharp with anticipation. Hank, the gruff test lead, paced behind them, his clipboard clutched tight. Dr. Ellen Chen and Mike Torres, the propulsion leads, watched from the back, their presence a reminder of the stakes. Yesterday's confrontation with Greg Larson, his attempt to steal her valve design, had been flagged for review, but today was about the test. Success could cement her place at SpaceX, failure could end it. Emily's laptop glowed with the final simulation, her adaptive valve, inspired by her father's sketch, dynamically adjusting fuel flow to tame the beast's turbulence. The design had aced prototype tests, stabilizing pressure at 85% thrust. Today, they'd push it to 100%. Full power, the conditions where the beast had misfired catastrophically before. Her confrontation with Greg had bought her this shot, with Jake's server logs proving the design was hers. But Greg was out there, likely watching, waiting for her to crash. She adjusted her headset, her voice cutting through the bunker's hum. "Fuel pumps to 10% pressure. Let's light this thing up." The rig hummed, a low vibration shaking the floor. The monitors showed steady data, pressure, flow, turbulence, all green. Emily's breath caught, her mind flashing to her father's barn in Edenville, Pennsylvania, the nights she'd spent fixing tractors under his gruff guidance. "Machines don't care who you are, Em," he'd said. The beast didn't care about Greg's sabotage or her doubts, it just needed to work. The test ramped up, pumps pushing fuel through the manifold at 30%, then 50%. The engine's hum grew to a roar, the test stand trembling as flames licked from the nozzle, a controlled inferno glowing orange against the dusk. Emily watched the sensors, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The adaptive valve was working, adjusting flow with precision, turbulence metrics staying low. Jake flashed her a grin, his dark eyes bright. "You're killing it, Em," he whispered. At 80% pressure, the data held strong, the valve compensating for thermal stress like she'd designed it to. The bunker erupted in quiet cheers, Hank giving her a rare nod. Emily's heart soared, a vision of success taking shape, Dr. Chen's approval, Musk's respect, her dad's pride. She thought of her mother's letters, discovered in Edenville, proof of a love she hadn't known existed. This test was for them, for Tom, for Linda, for herself. But as the test hit 95% pressure, a warning blipped on her screen, a pressure spike in the secondary fuel line, small but growing. The roar outside faltered, the flames flickering unevenly. Emily's stomach dropped, her mind racing. "Jake, check the secondary line," she shouted, her fingers flying over the keyboard to isolate the issue. Jake scanned the readouts, his face paling. "It's the valve's feedback loop," he said. "It's overcorrecting, choking the flow." The bunker went silent, the crew's eyes on her. The spike grew, vibrations shaking the rig, threatening a misfire that could destroy the beast. Emily's heart pounded, memories of past failures flashing, the manifold crack, the alloy fracture, Greg's smirks. She couldn't fail now, not with the leads watching, not with her design on the line. She thought of her father's cough, his frail voice, "Don't quit, Em." She wouldn't. "Reduce pressure to 90%, she ordered, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her. "I'm rerouting the feedback loop." She dove into the control software, her MIT training kicking in as she coded a patch to stabilize the valve's response. The second stretched, the rig's roar deafening, flames dancing wildly outside. Jake relayed sensor updates, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. The patch deployed, and the spike flattened, the data sliding back to green. The valve adjusted, flow stabilizing, the flames steadying into a brilliant blue. The bunker exhaled, cheers erupting as the test hit 100% pressure, full power, no misfires. Emily's knees buckled, relief flooding her. The beast was alive, her valve a triumph. Hank clapped her shoulder, Dr. Chen nodding with approval. Jake pulled her into a quick hug, his grin wide. "You did it, Em." The crew swarmed the monitors, data streaming like a victory song. Emily's chest swelled with pride, her mind racing with what came next, presenting the results, securing her place on the project, proving Greg's theft. She pictured her dad, his hazel eyes warm with pride, the stars above Edenville that had fueled her dreams. The test wasn't the end, but it was a giant leap toward fixing the beast for good. But as the rig powered down, the flames fading into smoke, a technician rushed into the bunker, his face pale. "Harper, we've got a problem," he said, holding up a tablet. "Post-test diagnostics show a micro-leak in the valve seal. It held for the test, but it's degrading. If we run it again without a fix, it could blow." The words hit like a punch, the victory souring. Emily stared at the tablet, the data showing a hairline fracture in the valve's polymer seal, invisible during the test but a ticking time bomb. Her triumph was fragile, the glitch a threat to everything she'd fought for. She thought of Greg, likely hearing about the test's success and now this flaw, a chance to twist the narrative, to claim her design was flawed. Dr. Chen approached, her expression serious. "Good work on the test, Harper," she said. "But this leak needs a fix before we certify the valve. You've got 48 hours to address it before the leads review." Emily nodded, her throat tight. 48 hours to redesign the seal, with Greg's sabotage still unresolved and her dad's recovery weighing on her. She glanced at Jake, who gave her a determined nod. "We've got this, Em," he said. "New seal, no problem." She forced a smile, but the pressure was crushing. The test had been a high, a moment where she'd felt unstoppable, like the girl in her father's barn fixing engines under the stars. But the leak was a reminder of how close she was to losing it all. She thought of her mother's letters, the pain of their discovery, and her reconciliation with Tom. Those truths had made her stronger, but this glitch could undo her. As the crew cleared the bunker, Emily stayed at her console, pulling up the valve schematics. The Texas night pressed against the windows, the test stand outside now dark but still looming. She thought of Musk's words, "Failure's data, Harper." The leak was data, a puzzle she could solve. But Greg was out there, plotting, and the clock was ticking. Jake sat beside her, cracking open a Red Bull. "What's the plan, boss?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "New polymer for the seal," Emily said, her voice firm. "Something heat-resistant, flexible under pressure. And we check every component for stress points." She thought of her dad's notebook, it sketches a lifeline in Edenville. Maybe there was another gem in there, a clue to save her design. The stars glittered above Boca Chica, faint but steady, like the ones she'd seen in Edenville. Emily gripped her laptop, her resolve hardening. The beast had roared tonight, her valve proving its worth. The leak was a setback, but she'd faced worse, bullies, doubts, stolen designs, hidden letters. She'd fix this, prove Greg wrong, and keep her promise to her dad, to herself. The final test wasn't over, it was just beginning. The Boca Chica control bunker was a fortress of tension, its concrete walls amplifying the hum of monitors and the low murmur of engineers. Emily Harper stood at the front of the room, her laptop projecting schematics of the beast's adaptive valve onto a screen, her heart pounding as she faced the propulsion leads. Dr. Ellen Chen and Mike Torres sat at the head of the table, their expressions unreadable, while the test crew, including Hank, filled the seats. Jake Martinez leaned against the back wall, his grin a quiet anchor. With 13 days left on Elon Musk's deadline, this meeting was Emily's chance to cement her triumph, or lose everything to Greg Larson's sabotage. The valve test 2 days ago had been a near-perfect success, her design stabilizing the beast at full power, a roar that shook the Texas sky. But the post-test discovery of a micro-leak in the valve seal had cast a shadow, a flaw she'd spent 48 hours fixing with a new heat-resistant polymer. The updated valve was ready for another test, but Greg's theft of her design loomed larger. His email claiming the valve as his own had been flagged for review, and today, Emily would present her evidence, server logs, emails, timestamps, to prove the truth. She adjusted her headset, her voice steady despite the nerves. The adaptive valve design, she began, clicking to a slide showing the valve schematics, stabilizes fuel flow under high pressure, reducing turbulence by 40%. The recent test at 100% thrust proved its viability, and the new polymer seal addresses the micro-leak. She paused, her eyes meeting Dr. Chen's. This design is mine, built from my simulations and my father's sketch. Greg Larson accessed my files and submitted them as his own. The room stirred, murmurs rippling through the crew. Greg sat near the front, his polished blazer and smirk intact, but his eyes flickered with unease. "That's a serious accusation, Harper," he said, his voice smooth. "The valve was a team effort. I refined your rough ideas into something workable." Emily's jaw tightened, anger surging. She thought of Edenville, the bullies who'd mocked her dreams, the MIT classmates who'd dismissed her. Greg was no different, but this time, she had proof. She clicked to a new slide, showing Jake's server logs. "These timestamps show I uploaded the valve design 5 days before your proposal," she said. "Emails to Jake Martinez detail my work from Pennsylvania. You didn't refine anything, you copied my files." Greg's smirk faltered, his face reddening. "Server logs can be manipulated," he said, leaning forward. "You're grasping, Harper. Your inexperience is showing." The accusation stung, echoing her father's doubts, her own insecurities. But Jake stepped forward, his phone in hand. "Not so fast, Larson," he said, his voice sharp. He handed Dr. Chen a USB drive. Backed up logs, email threads, even metadata from Emily's simulations. "It's all there. She built the valve from scratch, and you know it." Dr. Chen plugged the drive into her laptop, her eyes scanning the files. Mike Torres leaned over, his grizzled face stern. The room went silent, the air electric with anticipation. Emily's heart pounded, her mind flashing to her father's barn, the nights she'd spent fixing tractors under his guidance. "Machines don't care who you are, Em. Neither did the truth, it was in the data, undeniable." Dr. Chen looked up, her voice calm but firm. "The evidence is clear. Harper's design predates Larson's proposal. Greg, your actions violated SpaceX's integrity standards. You're suspended pending a full investigation." Greg's face drained of color, his smirk gone. "This is a mistake," he stammered, standing. "I've given a decade to this company." "Sit down," Mike snapped. "You've given us lies. Harper's the one who delivered." The crew murmured, some nodding, others staring at Greg in shock. Hank gave Emily a subtle thumbs up, his gruff demeanor softened by respect. Emily's chest loosened, relief flooding her. She'd fought for her truth, just as she'd fought for the beast, and she'd won. Before she could process it, the bunker door opened, and Elon Musk strode in, his lanky frame casual but commanding. The room froze, his presence like a spark in dry grass. He scanned the monitors, then turned to Emily, his eyes sharp but warm. "Harper," he said, "your valve saved the beast. That test was a hell of a show. Walk me through the fix." Emily's breath caught, her nerves giving way to pride. She walked him through the valve's design, the polymer seal, the test data, her voice steady as she detailed the turbulent solution. Musk listened, nodding, his faint smile a rare seal of approval. "Good work," he said. "You didn't just fix an engine, you showed what's possible when you don't quit. Keep pushing." He clapped her shoulder, then addressed the room. "Harper's leading the next phase of the beast's integration. Chen, Torres, make it happen." With that, he left, the bunker exhaling in his wake. The crew erupted in applause, Jake pulling Emily into a quick hug. "Told you, Em," he whispered. "You're a rock star." Dr. Chen approached, her smile genuine. "You've earned this," she said. "The valve's certified for production. Get ready for a bigger role." Emily's heart soared, the weight of weeks, Greg's sabotage, her father's illness, her mother's letters, lifting. She thought of Edenville, the stars she'd dreamed of reaching, the barn where she'd learned to fight for what mattered. She'd proven herself, not just to Musk, but to the girl who'd felt small in a town that didn't understand her. Later, as the crew cleared out, Emily sat at her console, the Texas night pressing against the bunker's windows. She opened her laptop, pulling up the test data, its green lines a testament to her triumph. She thought of her father, Tom, recovering in Edenville, his pride in her a bridge across their years of silence. She thought of her mother, Linda, whose letters had torn open old wounds but also shown love she hadn't known existed. The beast had been her puzzle, but it was also her mirror, reflecting the resilience she'd built through pain and doubt. She emailed Jake a thank you, her fingers lingering on the keyboard. His evidence had saved her, just as his belief had carried her through the darkest moments. She thought of Mrs. Clara Thompson, her high school teacher, who'd seen her potential when no one else had. "You're going to change the world," Clara had said. Maybe she was starting to. But as she packed her bag, a new email pinged from Dr. Chen. "Harper, the investigation into Larson's actions uncovered additional discrepancies. He's been terminated, but his allies on the team may resist your leadership. Be prepared for pushback." The words were a cold splash, a reminder that her fight wasn't over. Greg was gone, but his shadow lingered in the team's dynamics, in the skepticism she'd face as a young woman leading a high-stakes project. Emily stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder, the bunker now quiet except for the hum of cooling equipment. The test stand outside was dark, the beast sleeping but ready for its next roar. She thought of her father's words, "Mistakes teach you, Em." Greg's sabotage had taught her to stand up, to trust her work, to fight for her place. Musk's praise had shown her she belonged. But the pushback ahead was a new test, one she'd face with the same fire that had carried her this far. The Texas stars glittered above, faint but fierce, like the ones in Edenville. Emily stepped outside, the warm night air brushing her face. She wasn't the girl from nowhere anymore, she was the engineer who'd tamed the beast, who'd faced down a thief and won. She'd keep pushing, just as Musk had said, because the stars were closer now, and she wasn't stopping until she reached them. The Pennsylvania sky stretched wide over Edenville, a canvas of soft blues and golds as the late spring sun dipped toward the horizon. Emily Harper drove her rental car down the familiar winding roads, the scent of damp earth and wildflowers seeping through the open window. The farmhouse came into view, its peeling white paint, sagging porch, and sturdy red barn a snapshot of her childhood. Her heart swelled with a mix of nostalgia and nervous anticipation. She was back, not as the girl who'd left for MIT years ago, but as the engineer who tamed the beast, with 12 days left on Elon Musk's deadline but a victory already in hand. The success of the Beast's test at Boca Chica, Texas, still felt surreal. Her adaptive valve design had stabilized the rocket engine, earning her Musk's praise and a leadership role on the project. Greg Larson's sabotage, stealing her design, had been exposed, his termination a vindication of her fight. But the email from Dr. Ellen Chen warning of pushback from Greg's allies lingered, a reminder that her work at SpaceX wasn't done. Yet today wasn't about rockets or office politics. It was about her father, Tom, and the town that had shaped her. Emily parked in the gravel driveway, her boots crunching as she stepped out. The barn loomed in the backyard, its weathered wood a testament to years of fixing tractors with Tom, their hands greasy, their silences filled with love. Her reconciliation with him, sparked by the discovery of her mother's letters and his pneumonia diagnosis, had begun to heal old wounds, but their last talk had been brief, his pride in her a spark she wanted to fan into a flame. The front door creaked open, and Tom appeared, leaning on a cane but stronger than when she'd left him a week ago. His flannel shirt hung less loosely now, his hazel eyes, mirrors of her own, bright with surprise. He said, his voice gruff but warm. Didn't know you were coming. Wanted to surprise you, she said, smiling as she climbed the porch steps. Doctor says you're doing better. He grunted, a faint smile breaking through. Antibiotics are working. Stubborn old man still kicking. She hugged him, his frame thin but solid, the scent of coffee and oil familiar. The embrace felt different now, free of the tension that had lingered since their fight months ago. She thought of her mother, Linda, whose letters she'd found in the farmhouse, yellowed envelopes full of love and regret. They'd torn open old pain, but also shown Emily the strength in her father's silence, his choice to protect her even if it meant hiding the truth. Inside, the farmhouse was unchanged, cluttered with tools, car magazines, and faded photos. Emily set her bag down, her laptop inside a reminder of the Beast, but she pushed work aside. Made you something, she said, pulling a small wooden box from her bag. It was carved with a rocket, a nod to the one she'd made for him in middle school shop class, the box where she'd found Linda's letters. Tom's eyes softened as he took it, tracing the carving. You always were good with your hands, he said. Like me, but better. They sat in the living room, the rain from her last visit replaced by golden light streaming through the windows. Emily told him about Boca Chica, the test's roar, Musk's nod, Greg's downfall. Tom listened, his cane tapping the floor, his pride evident in the way he leaned forward. Fixed a rocket engine, he said, shaking his head. My girl, changing the world. The words hit hard, stirring a memory of their fight, his caution about her risky career. I was scared you didn't believe in me, she admitted, her voice soft. When you told me to pick something safer, it hurt. Tom's face fell, his hand tightening on the cane. I was wrong, he said. I saw your mom in you, stubborn, dreaming big. When she left, it broke me. I didn't want you to get hurt chasing stars I couldn't reach. The confession was raw, a bridge across years of silence. Emily thought of Linda's letters, her mother's regret, I wasn't strong enough to stay. Tom had carried that pain, trying to shield Emily from it. I'm not her, she said gently. I'm staying, Dad. For you, for this. She gestured to the farmhouse, the barn, their shared history. He nodded, his eyes wet. I know. I'm sorry I doubted you. Seeing you now, you're stronger than I ever was. The moment was a balm, healing the last cracks in their bond. Emily squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that had guided hers over wrenches and bolts. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing like it hadn't in years, about the barn, her childhood, her dreams of Mars. Tom shared stories of Linda, not the pain of her leaving but the love they'd had, giving Emily a fuller picture of the woman who'd shaped her indirectly. As dusk settled, Emily stepped outside, the air cool and fragrant with blooming lilacs. The barn called to her, its doors creaking as she entered. The smell of oil and hay wrapped around her, a time machine to her 10-year-old self, wrench in hand, Tom's voice steady, "Machines don't care who you are." She ran her fingers over his old toolbox, finding his notebook, the one with the adaptive valve sketch that had saved the beast. It was more than a sketch, it was their legacy, a thread connecting her past to her future. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jake Martinez, "New valve seal passed stress tests. Ready for final cert. You're a legend, M." She smiled, gratitude warming her. Jake had been her lifeline at SpaceX, his belief unwavering through Greg's sabotage and test failures. Another message followed, from Mrs. Clara Thompson, her high school physics teacher, "Heard you're in town. Diner tomorrow? Kids here need to meet a hero." The idea of speaking to Edenville's kids sparked something in Emily. She'd been the odd one out here, the girl mocked for her jet engine models, her dreams too big for a small town. Maybe she could show them what was possible, just as Clara had shown her. The next morning, the Edenville diner was packed, its vinyl booths filled with locals sipping coffee and kids from the high school science club. Clara greeted Emily with a hug, her graying hair and sharp wit unchanged. "You're a star, Emily," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "Tell them your story." Emily stood at the front, her SpaceX jacket a badge of her journey. She spoke of the beast, the valve, Musk's challenge, Greg's betrayal. She told them about Edenville's barn, her father's lessons, the stars that had fueled her. "You don't need to be from a big city to dream big," she said, her eyes on a shy girl in the back, clutching a notebook. "If I can fix a rocket, you can do anything." The kids clapped, their questions pouring out, about rockets, engineering, failure. The girl with the notebook approached, her voice timid. "I want to build planes," she said. "But everyone says it's too hard." Emily knelt, meeting her eyes. "They told me that, too. Keep building. You'll prove them wrong." The moment felt like a gift, a chance to give back what Clara had given her. As the crowd dispersed, Clara squeezed her arm. "You've changed this town, Emily. They'll remember this." Back at the farmhouse, Emily and Tom sat on the porch, the stars emerging above. She showed him the valve schematics on her laptop, explaining how his sketch had sparked the fix. He chuckled, his cough gone, his strength returning. "Guess we're a good team," he said. "We always were," she replied, leaning against him. The stars glittered, closer now, like the ones she'd reached for at SpaceX. She thought of her mother's letters, the pain and love they held, and her own journey, bullies, doubts, Greg's sabotage, Musk's challenge. She'd faced them all, not just for herself, but for her dad, for Edenville, for the kids who dream bigger because of her. Her phone pinged, an email from Dr. Chen, "Harper, valve certification is complete. Prepare for resistance from Larson's allies in the integration phase. You're ready." The warning was a jolt, a reminder that SpaceX was still a battlefield. But Emily wasn't the same engineer who trembled at Greg's smirks. She'd tamed the beast, reconciled with her dad, inspired a town. Whatever came next, she'd face it with the fire that had carried her this far. The night air was cool, the stars a promise. Emily gripped her father's hand, the farmhouse a home again. She was ready, for SpaceX, for Mars, for the dreams that had started here, under Edenville's sky. The Boca Chica launch site was a cathedral of ambition, its launch tower piercing a cloudless Texas sky as dawn painted the horizon in hues of pink and gold. Emily Harper stood on the observation platform, her SpaceX jacket zipped against the morning chill, her hazel eyes fixed on the rocket before her, a sleek colossus, its hull gleaming with the promise of Mars. At its heart was the beast, the rocket engine she'd tamed with her adaptive valve design, now fully integrated and ready for its first orbital test. With only 10 days left on Elon Musk's original deadline, today's launch was the culmination of her journey, a moment that felt as vast as the stars she dreamed of as a girl in Edenville, Pennsylvania. The platform buzzed with engineers, their headsets crackling with final checks, while drones hummed overhead, capturing the scene. Jake Martinez stood beside her, his lanky frame vibrating with excitement, his grin wide. "We did it, Em," he said, nudging her. "Your valve's about to send that beast to orbit." Emily smiled, but her stomach churned with nerves. The past weeks had been a gauntlet: the valve certification, Greg Larson's termination for stealing her design, and the pushback from his allies on the team. Dr. Ellen Chen had named her lead engineer for the beast's integration, a role that tested her every day, late nights debugging systems, mediating team tensions, proving her leadership to skeptics. But the rocket stood ready, its systems green, her valve a quiet hero at its core. This was her moment, but it carried the weight of everyone who believed in her: her father, Tom, Jake, Mrs. Clara Thompson, even Musk. She adjusted her headset, her voice calm as she checked in with the control bunker. "All systems nominal?" she asked. Hank's gruff drawl came through. "Green across the board, Harper. You're clear to initiate countdown." Emily nodded, her heart pounding. She thought of her father's barn, the smell of oil and hay, Tom's steady hands guiding her wrench. "Machines don't care who you are, Em." The beast didn't care about her doubts or Greg's sabotage, it cared about precision, and she'd given it that. She thought of her mother's letters, discovered in Edenville, their pain and love a reminder of her resilience. She'd faced bullies, betrayal, and her own fears to get here. Now, the stars were waiting. The countdown began, the launch director's voice booming over the speakers: T-10 minutes. The crowd on the platform, engineers, VIPs, media, fell silent, the air electric with anticipation. Emily's mind flashed to Edenville's diner, where she'd spoken to kids a week ago, inspiring a shy girl who dreamed of planes. "Keep building," she'd said. Today, she was building a path to the stars, not just for herself, but for them. At T-5 minutes, a glitch pinged in her headset, a slight pressure fluctuation in the beast's fuel system. Her heart lurched, memories of the valve's microleak flashing back. She glanced at Jake, who was already on his radio, checking with the bunker. "It's minor," he said, his voice steady. "Your valve's compensating, but we need to recalibrate the secondary pump." Emily's fingers flew over her tablet, pulling up the fuel system's diagnostics. The adaptive valve was working, adjusting flow dynamically, but the pump's calibration was off by a fraction, risking turbulence at full thrust. She thought of her father's sketch, the adaptive valve that had saved the beast. This was no different, just another bolt to tighten. "Reroute power to the secondary pump," she ordered, her voice firm. "Increase feedback to the valve by 5%. The bunker team executed her commands, the fluctuation stabilizing within seconds. Jake gave her a thumbs up, his grin back. "You're a wizard, Em." The countdown resumed, the glitch a fleeting scare, but Emily's pulse didn't slow. The stakes were too high: a failed launch could discredit her valve, her leadership, her place at SpaceX. T-1 minute, the director announced. The rocket systems hummed, a low roar building as fuel pumps primed the beast. Emily gripped the platform's railing, her eyes locked on the rocket. She thought of Tom, recovering in Edenville, his pride in her a warmth across the miles. She thought of Clara, who'd seen her potential when no one else had. She thought of Musk, his cryptic nod after her first test, his challenge that had pushed her to this moment. 10, 9, 8, the crowd chanted, the ground trembling as the beast ignited, flames erupting from its base in a brilliant blue-white inferno. Emily's breath caught, the roar deafening, the heat palpable even from the platform. The rocket lifted, slow at first, then accelerating, a spear of fire piercing the sky. The beast's hum was steady, her valve holding, the data streaming to her tablet all green. The platform erupted in cheers, Jake pulling her into a bear hug. "It's flying, Em," he shouted over the noise. Dr. Chen and Mike Torres joined them, their smiles rare but genuine. "Flawless launch," Chen said, clapping Emily's shoulder. Your valve made this possible. Emily's chest swelled, tears pricking her eyes as she watched the rocket climb, a trail of smoke curling toward the heavens. The beast was in orbit, its system stable, her design proven beyond doubt. She thought of the stars above Edenville, the ones she'd dreamed of as a kid in her father's barn. They were closer now, not just a dream but a destination. She'd done it, for Tom, for Jake, for the kids in Edenville, for herself. The platform buzzed with celebration, engineers high-fiving, media snapping photos. Musk appeared, his lanky frame cutting through the crowd, his eyes finding Emily. Harper, he said, his voice carrying over the din, you didn't just fix an engine, you built a piece of the future. Mars is next. His words were a spark, igniting her vision. She saw herself leading more projects, designing engines for Mars missions, inspiring others to reach beyond their doubts. She nodded, her voice steady. I'm ready. Musk clapped her shoulder, then moved on, his focus already on the next challenge. Emily stayed on the platform, the rocket now a speck in the sky, its telemetry streaming success. Jake leaned beside her, his voice soft. What's next, boss? She smiled, the Texas sun warm on her face. Bigger engines, bigger dreams. Maybe a trip to Mars. He laughed, tossing her a Red Bull. Count me in. Later, in the quiet of the control bunker, Emily sat at her console, the launch data glowing on her screen. She emailed Tom a photo of the rocket's ascent, her message simple, we did it, Dad. Love you. She imagined him in the farmhouse, his cane tapping, his grin wide. She emailed Clara, too, promising to visit Edenville again, to keep inspiring kids. Her mother's letters, tucked in her bag, were a quiet presence, their pain softened by the love they'd revealed. She thought of her journey, the bullies in Edenville, the imposter syndrome at MIT, Greg's sabotage, the test failures, her father's doubts, her mother's absence. Each had been a weight, but also a forge, shaping her into the engineer who'd stood up, fought back, and won. The beast had been her puzzle, but it was also her mirror, reflecting the fire she'd always carried. A final email pinged from Dr. Chen, Harper, integration team awaits your leadership. Some resistance remains, but you've proven you can handle it. Welcome to the next phase. The words were a challenge, a reminder that SpaceX was never static. Resistance from Greg's allies would test her, but she wasn't the same engineer who trembled at his smirks. She'd tamed the beast, launched a rocket, earned Musk's trust. Whatever came next, she'd face it with the same resolve. The Texas night settled over Boca Chica, the launch tower now a silent sentinel, the stars brilliant above. Emily stepped outside, the air cool and alive with possibility. She thought of the girl in Edenville's diner, dreaming of planes, and the countless others who'd looked to the sky because of her. Mars was out there, a red speck in the cosmos, and she was part of the mission to reach it. She gripped her tablet, the launch data a testament to her triumph. The stars were no longer just dreams. They were her future, her legacy, her home. Emily Harper, the girl from nowhere, had built a rocket to the stars, and she was just getting started. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?